I am a fitness franchise owner. Anytime Fitness is the name of the franchise. At one point in time, I had 5 locations. I'm now down to 3. I sold 2 last year, and I just recently released a book called The Shadow, which is about Psalm 23 and Psalm 91. Really a revelation I felt God gave me about 7 years ago. I had the notes for that. And where to find me? I have a website, MikeDysonAuthor.com. They can do an info at MikeDysonAuthor.com if they wanted to email or email through the website. And also, on if they go on the website, there's kind of like a free preview guide to the book that people could download. So again, that's MikeDysonAuthor.com.
Hey, quick question for you. How did you get involved in fitness?
Well, that comes from a major health issue I had in my own life in the early 2000s. I got diagnosed with degenerative disc, which is a pretty common thing, I guess. But mine was pretty bad. I was 4 and 5, really thinning of the disc area. Sometimes I couldn't walk. I would have to crawl. It was just a terrible time. There was nothing that could fix it except for shots. I was not a candidate for surgery, and I was in my early 40s when all this went on. I would have to sleep like an L at nighttime with my legs hanging off the side of the bed to relieve the pressure and pain. And literally, sometimes I would cry at night. I'm a faith-filled person. I believe in the Bible. My relationship is with God, and my God is Jesus. And I believe Him to be the healer, but I just wasn't. That's not what I was walking. I was walking in pain, right? And then I was in a church service in 2004, and I felt God just impressed upon me to change my health. Now, if you looked at me, I wasn't obese. I wasn't like massively overweight. I probably had a little around my middle, but it wasn't much. I was a former Marine. I just had become sedentary in my work environment. So the next week, I joined a wellness center. I went from 3 snooze a day to actually 5:30 every morning. I was at the gym doors. It was kind of that word kind of came with faith. I didn't know where I was going, what I was doing, but I started walking on a treadmill in pain. Every day I walked in pain on the treadmill, but I had that word and I just knew I was doing the right thing. Long story short, that I got better and better and better. Anytime Fitness opened up about a mile and a half from our house, anybody who works corporate or works in the mornings knows that minutes matter in the morning, right? It always seems like you're pressed for time. So that shaved about 20 minutes off of our time in the morning, which is great, right? So we were able to go to the gym and do what I felt I was called to do. And then the other part of that word is I felt I was being kind of drawn out of the corporate world. I'd been in it for a while. I was called dramatically to the ministry in 1994, but kind of got disappointed and disillusioned in some ways and kind of, I guess, slid away from that. And in that time, again, I felt that was being like just being called out of the corporate world. So I put the numbers together. We were paycheck to paycheck people. I mean, I definitely know what parentheses mean at the bottom of a checkbook. That means negative, and we've been there for sure. We didn't have money in the bank. We had about 48,000, I guess it was, in the equity of our house. I put all the numbers together. We fasted for 10 days, not from food. We did it from media. We got completely quiet. We were just trying to hear yes or no. And we didn't hear God say no. So we took it as a yes. And we went into the franchise, and it took off 6 months. We were exceeded franchise expectations. There's a lot to the story, but that's how we got into it. And now here we are all these years later. And, now we have 3 very solid clubs.
Congratulations that you're able
Thank
to
you.
identify something that you needed, not only from a physical standpoint, but also
Yeah.
spiritual, then ultimately financially.
Yeah.
How were you able to come to terms with this life that I've currently was living isn't for me anymore, so I'm going to create a new one?
You're talking about like when I got the word and felt called to change my health. Is that what you mean? It's interesting because I already had a relationship with God at the time, but I just was probably being, I'll say, called into deeper water. I'll put it that way. Like I'm kind of going along. I'm not my health. Obviously, I described what was going on. Um, I just knew, and this sounds kind of strange, maybe to some people, but I just knew it was God. Right. So for me, I think the word came with faith with it. It wasn't like I had to, like in past, before my relationship with God, like have to white knuckle, like, pull myself up on my bootstraps and go. It wasn't like that at all. I mean, I actually, like I said, I was a 3 snoozer. Like, you hit the button every single morning 3 times, right, to gain those extra minutes. And I was completely transformed by just that word to begin to change my health, even though I really didn't know where I was headed. So, It's kind of weird. It wasn't like in my mind, let's make a transition. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to step from here to there. It just kind of came with that word. So,
When it comes to your health issues and
yeah.
that struggle, when you first came face to face with the reality that you're going through your health issues, what were some of the
Yeah.
emotions that you remember experiencing?
I think it gets real discouraging. I think that's probably discouragement is probably the biggest thing that I faced. I'm sure I've ministered with a lot of other people and they face the same thing, right? Because it's a very helpless feeling when and if doctors are involved and people have remedies or whatever it may be, but those don't seem to work. And then you're left every moment of every day to deal with whatever it is you have to deal with. And typically you just make concessions, right? You learn how to operate throughout life with whatever it is that you may have. You just operate in life in a different way, in a different capacity, because you can't operate in that fullness anymore. So I think that's another one too, is it shifts your kind of your focus. Like if my back, I would always have to be careful when I did certain things. When I would sneeze, I would have to brace myself. I mean, so these are all mental postures, right? That I wouldn't have had if I didn't have that issue. So I think it does a lot to you psychologically when you have those type of issues for sure. And then it's hard to remain hopeful, right? When you become discouraged, right? You can't see that you're going to get any better. And I think many times that exacerbates the problem, right? Because then you tend to go further back and you digress. And I think that causes a bigger problem many times.
I remember some people sharing with me that when they started to realize that their health was changing, not necessarily getting better, not necessarily getting worse, just changing,
Yeah.
right? One of the biggest obstacles that they face was, do I really want to go find out what is wrong?
Oh, interesting. Because of fear, you think because of fear that they were
Because
worried?
of fear, yeah.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I
Yeah.
think some people maybe have an idea that something isn't going well, but if they
Yeah.
don't confront it, it's always in the closet with the door closed,
Yeah.
right? Maybe
Yeah.
from your perspective or from that scenario that I just painted, what role do you think fear can potentially play in someone's pursuit of improving their health?
I think a lot. I mean, I think what made mine a little different is that, and I would have to go to when I rededicated my life to the Lord in 1993. The first thing I felt that He spoke to me was I had to stop blaming, and that's a lot of my childhood wounds, right? So I think that it was always my walk has been about personal accountability. So I've not really been. I write in my book that there's no river in Egypt called denial. It's a play on words, right? So for me, I think that I've always wanted to, and plus I was sharing a little bit before we got on about my corporate background, but I was really a person who was big into process improvement. So when you take all that and you internalize that, I'm always looking for how to fix something, right? How to become better. So I didn't necessarily get in that. I always wanted to know what was wrong, so that way I could identify it and then combat it. But if you don't have that mentality, and I have ran across a lot of people, like my wife and I we were getting our blood work done twice a year. We wanted to expose what might be inside, so we could combat it before maybe it become a potential real health condition. But I have ran into people who won't do their blood work by virtue of what you just said, because they're fearful of what it might reveal. It may reveal nothing, but the fear is paralyzing them from doing it. So I am the opposite approach. I think obviously fear is not your friend by any means, right? I'm not saying that there aren't sometimes fear is a positive, right? A warning sign to danger or something like that. But what we're talking about is really an internal fear that I think just, and my book talked about this, it paralyzes people from doing really what it is they need to do. And my book also uses another term called rendering someone somewhat useless because they don't move forward in that and fear paralyzes them in that spot. And then they don't get to move into their full potential. So I think fear is a big, big one for many people. That's in any category, whether it's in health, whether it's in finances, whether it's stepping into business. I mean, it runs the gamut in pretty well every category. So yeah, that's a high effective tool, in my opinion, of the enemy of our soul, is fear.
Especially when it comes to, let's say, a change, right? Like if I was living my life one way, drinking drugs, whatever, and I'm not dead yet, okay, let's keep going, right? Because I'm used to it and I
Yeah,
haven't died.
yeah,
But now if
yeah.
I stop and I'm like, oh, what if I don't like the way that my life is going now because I don't feel as good or I'm not as busy as might be. Could also be that the unknown and maybe the new identity could also prevent people from thinking, oh, I don't know if I want to become that person.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. So I think it could be two perspectives to look at this. For me, from a faith perspective, I have a relationship with God. So for me, I feel like every step that I take in that direction or in his direction, it's going to be good, right? So, and whether I see that or not, right? Because faith is in an unseen world. It's you can't hope for something that you already have in front of you, right? You can't. But yet, faith is the substance of those things that are hopeful, or that you hope for. But it's the evidence of things not seen. So, on the faith side of things, for me, I'm not so fearful. I'm not going to say that you don't know what's ahead. Like when I went into my health journey, I didn't know what I was doing. Like, even though I had been a Marine, that was kind of forced exercise. Right now, I'm taking personal responsibility over my own life. But I wasn't really, I knew it was positive. You know what I'm saying? But I do think on the other side, so if someone was just trying to make an attempt at doing something themselves, then there's really no promise. Like from my side, faith side, there is a promise. But if you don't have that and you're disconnected from that, then you only have your own thoughts to think about what might be ahead. There's nothing there to say it's going to be this way or it's going to be that way. So now, like you said, it's interesting because I write about it in my book as well, is that we get into this mentality that when we do things and we don't feel there's any effect, we don't think other people around us could say maybe something different, but we don't feel there's an effect. So therefore, we almost take that as a sign to say it's okay. When in all actuality, it could be doing a lot of damage. I mean, many people pull into fast food drive-through lanes and never maybe feel the effects of that. When in all actuality, that's really damaging for their body. So people just get in habits. And like you said, when you try to make changes, and again, I think I'm not going to say there's nothing that goes with it on the face side, but I think when you're outside of that, you don't have any promise. It's all about what you think or about what you've seen other people. And I think that does make people weary of taking steps. A, can they trust themselves in the step that they're going to make? They've been trusting themselves, even though, and really to go scripturally, I mean, the Israelites did this when they got out by the parting of the Red Sea, they're like, "Wait, what's up? I mean, you brought us all the way out here just for us to die. We could have just stayed in Egypt, right? At least we knew what we were going to get, even though we're still slaves." It's crazy mentality, but it is a mentality that we as humans enter into as well. We feel sometimes better when we stay in our comfort, even though our comfort is really not good for us at all, and it's not going to take us anywhere.
Because I can't see the forest from the trees, I became comfortable being lost, and you tell me a way to be found, and I don't trust it.
Right. Yeah, because I think a part of you, going back to what we were talking about a minute ago, about how does it feel, you become discouraged and hopeless. You almost begin to believe there is no other way, right? Like there is no way out. This is the way it is. This is my life. This is how it's supposed to be. These are the cards that I was dealt, whatever that may be in your mind. And this is where my book goes. That's what the shadow of death does. It tries to encapsulate people and get them to believe something like what you just shared, which is frankly not true. There is a way, right? And but there are many things that try to come along and try to tell you there's not.
You mentioned your faith and you mentioned religion. That foundation is something that many people have, but there's also people who don't have it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I grew up in a religious household, and I have that as my foundation, and it's guided me in a number of different ways, and it continues to guide me. I can't I could logically think of a life without that foundation, but I truly can't appreciate a life without that foundation because, again, I'm guided by that light. For those who maybe don't have that foundation or are looking to obtain it, what are maybe some of the things that you would share with them in regards to the importance of that foundation when it comes to handling past experiences which may not have been healthy, especially from the childhood perspective?
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, I wish in some ways where you could just like magic wand someone to understand what you've been through and see all the things about how God and what He's done for my life. But I don't know why baseball comes to mind, but you think about it, and anybody who may have played a sport or anything that they may have had to try to do something at, if someone's been alongside of them and given them some sort of tools to be able to do it differently or to do it better, maybe memorize better, whatever that may be. And I think everyone's had something in their life to where they started one way and they kind of ended up another way by virtue of just some information that they got along the way. And they found that they went from 0 to say 5. Maybe they didn't go to 10, but they saw that there was an improvement. I think, for me in my life, I've tried it both ways. I was 32 years old when I rededicated my life to the Lord. And I walked in 13 years of what I'd say spiritual darkness because I thought I had moved away from God and was unredeemable. So I know what that's like to be in what I'll say spiritual darkness. Like it's just, I'm not guided, I'm aimless, I'm doing my own thing. I have my own sense of morality, which again, a person can be moral. I'm not saying that they can't be moral without God. I think where it happens is, and I'm going to speak from my experience. It's a very discouraging, helpless, shameful, guilty. It's just all those things I mentioned were in my life prior to my real commitment to God because I'm trying to attempt to do all these things myself. I have no outlet, I have no grace, no mercy other than what I give myself, which wasn't much of anything, right? You do something wrong, you swear you're not going to do it again, and then 2 months later you do the same thing, right? And it's just a vicious, vicious cycle. So I would say, I can say all day long, but God is real. And then like I said, my God is Jesus. It's not just a story to me. It's not just Christmas and it's not just Easter. It's a relationship. It's like a marriage. So when I prayed and asked God to come into my life, it's like when I married my wife. When I said I do to him. And when I said I do to him, then I said I'm no longer going to adulterate myself with the world. I'm no longer going to date other women because I'm now married to my wife. And now the thing is that man, I was rough. I mean, I had a lot of stuff going on. I had a lot of wounds inside my life. So now what happens? I tried to get rid of those wounds in my own way, and that never worked. Whether it was sex or drugs or alcohol, whatever it was, it just never went anywhere. All it did was gave more weight on my back. It created more shame and more guilt, right? So now when I rededicate my life to God, I mean, I'll tell people like if you're 10 pounds overweight and then you give your life to Christ, the next day you're still 10 pounds overweight. I mean, the bottom line is, now we're going to go through this process. And that's what God began to walk me down is to begin to let go of people, the unforgiveness, the bitterness, the rage, all the things that were inside of me, what everybody did to me, because I felt I had a junk hand in my life, to be honest with you. I had a chip on my shoulder. I was kicking the can about how my life was. And the problem was that I was the one holding the cards. So that means I'm always trying to figure out what to do with the cards. And I already consider the cards to be a mess. So I don't have any great gratitude for my cards. But when I switched the cards to give them to the one who made me, when it went out of my hands, then it became a whole different ballgame. So I would say, you could say try God. I mean, but the thing is, the Holy Spirit has to be in that moment. But I do know this much. I was on a couch in Pensacola, Florida, where I live now, November 17th of 93. There was no crying that went on or anything. No one would have known anything changed in my life. If we would have had a video camera there at the moment and we were watching it right now, you wouldn't have thought anything happened. But all I can tell you is my heart shifted. And I went from taking my own life in my own hands and giving it to the one who created me. So I would say to people who are weighted down, no matter what you do, that just doesn't leave. In my experience, in all the years that I tried to get rid of it, I tried to fill the hole, the inadequacies, the insecurities, all those things. And I was a high performer in my industry. I mean, I did very well when I was in the Marine Corps. I went in for the Marine of the Year. I was number 3 out of 9 Marines in the whole Marine Corps. So I'm only saying that my career was impeccable, but my life on the inside, phew, man, rough stuff. So I don't know if that answered the question, but I hope that if people are listening and they don't have a relationship with him, he wants a relationship with you. That's what I would say. So is it doing it on your own is empty.
I don't think there's anything that you can do on your own in this life. And I say that because look at everything that's been created. Look at how far we've come as a species. Look how far we've come as men, women, children, adults, black, white, pink, purple, green, doesn't matter. It's always with someone else. Like two people,
Right.
five people, 100 people, 1,000 people. When you started to identify some of the behavior, some of the things that you wanted to remove out of your life, for lack of a better word, maybe these are distractions,
Yeah.
right? And I think one of the biggest distractions is work because work will fuel the pursuit of money. It will take you away from your family, take you away from your loved ones. You miss birthdays, you miss anniversaries. Why do you think so many people are distracted in the world today?
Um, well, busyness keeps you from spending time with yourself, for one. I think this was an issue. I was talking with someone the other day. When COVID came along, we began to hear a lot more about mental health after COVID and during COVID timeframe. I think because people then had to kind of spend more time alone and with themselves. And I think when you're in the busyness of life, you're in some ways, this is subconscious, not conscious. You're in some ways running from the person that's on the inside. And you're staying so busy with all that you're trying to do. And then you're feeding off of what it is that you're frenzying over. You're feeding off of what you're frenzying over, which is your work or whatever it may be. And then that becomes a piece of your identity. And then you're building identity on the wrong thing. And that identity can only be fueled by the frenzy of what it is I'm trying to do. It's a never ending thing, right? So I think the distractions comes from, unfortunately, a wrong foundation in many people's lives. And we just talked about the spiritual side of things, right? So when you're ungrounded or unfounded, and I'm not saying Christians can't end up entertaining some of these same things because I got off chasing the corporate care for a period of time myself. My job became before God, right? Anything before God is out of order. But I think that's a big piece of it. Most people and men are a big one where their identity is all in their work. And that's why sometimes people, men, when they retire, they don't know what to do. And some go into very serious health challenges. Some even die because they can't handle being outside of their zone that they've created, which created that comfort. So I think and then I think that's a robber, right? So when you're in that environment and you're creating that identity, you're never really becoming all that you were created to be. And so that really, as much as you may seem like you're excelling, you're actually not fulfilling. You're excelling in categories, but fulfilling is a fulfillment in multiple categories within your life. And I do think also when it comes to relationships, when you're in that, that's another struggle because you're so almost inward focused about what I get, even though again, this is subconscious. Now you move into a relationship becomes about what do I get, when in actuality, a marriage is not about what do I get, it's about what do I give the other. It's a serving mentality. And then you translate that to God, that's the same type of environment, same type of relationship. So when you're in all these distractions and things, it's actually moving you away from relationship and into only a self-centered mindset about what it is you get.
Like the person who grew up, let's say they had a difficult childhood and money was scarce. So as they grew up, they're like, I don't want to ever feel
Yeah.
that way as an adult. So they pursue money.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
that's a distraction because they're traumatized from their childhood wounds they brought about in their adults, and they don't realize that they're re-traumatizing themselves because now they're working, 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 and they're
Right.
distracted from other things. Now it's impacting themselves, their health, their relationship with God,
Right.
for those who are religious, all these different areas
Right.
until the moment they take a step back and they're like, oh, that brand new car, I thought it was going to make me feel great. It doesn't.
Right. Right.
That big house, I thought it was going to make me feel special, but it's empty and it's just me in there. life is passing them by and they don't realize that they're just re-traumatizing themselves in different ways.
Yeah. Mhm.
That must be such a difficult revelation for some people to come to terms with.
Yeah, I think if you, again, if that's what you get, you kind of reveal, you get revealed to yourself, let's just say. Now, going back to faith again, I have to keep going back to there because I've kind of experienced all these things and I don't have anyone or anything to lean on. It's going to break me. Right, because now I have all that responsibility to somehow to fix that when I didn't already know how to fix it to begin with. Because if I would have known how to fix it, I wouldn't be on this road to begin with, right? So it's back to that hamster wheel. It never seems to end, but it did end for me. It didn't mean that I didn't have struggles, but in '93, when that occurred and I entered into a relationship with God, I began the process of healing because it comes down to roots, right? Like there's a, even biblically in the Greek, it says bitter root brings bitter fruit, right? So if there's a root inside, and the same there was, my mom took me across state lines to have me aborted, right? My life did not start right. Unfortunately, and thankfully, she did not do that. My dad left before I was born, but I had rejection from an early age before I was even out of my mother's womb. Right, my mom had narcolepsy. We had no money. I mean, we did. I did not get born with a silver spoon in my mouth, and not that I have one now. But the thing is that if you bring up a good point, because if you don't get the healing, and there's a scripture that says, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prospers." If you don't prosper your soul, that's where the problem's at. And then the soul is your mind, your will, and emotions. And these are the things that get affected along the way, right? And then what happens is when they do, they make a mark inside, and then we build walls around those things to encapsulate them. And we some of this is just an automatic pretense in our body for protection measures, but we carry it so far, we don't ever break the walls down, right? And then when they get so encapsulated, which Bible means that's a stronghold, it's a thinking, it's kind of like a fortress that's built around it. It becomes a driving to our character of who we are, how we react, how we treat people, how we see life. Just like you said, now all of a sudden someone goes and gets a new car. I mean, I sometimes think about this even with people that I would say that I've known that are believers. They can't afford a new car, but then they go and apply for a new car. And just because they get financing, somehow they think that that meant God said, "Hey, go get a new car." But we still have a brain. He's still giving us thought to say, look, budget wise, this doesn't work. So then self discipline has to take over and say, it's not for me right now, right? So I think those wounds, I feel for people. I do. I have been through these things, and they are gut wrenching things. And I have been in my if I would compare some, so to speak, my trauma in comparison to other people's, it's not even close to what other people face. All trauma, though, makes a mark on us, especially when they come from childhood wounds, and it really we don't it moves us away from trusting people. It moves us into, can be chip on the shoulder, can be entitlement, can be a lot of different things that go on in that. But every one of those things I just mentioned, they're all a bubble that keeps things out. And if it keeps things out, then that means it also keeps the things you need out as well. And that's where the problem is, right? Protection is one thing, but I was just telling someone the other day, when you love, for me, I had to learn how to love. I didn't see it displayed in my life. I didn't know what it meant. I could read the Bible and see, I know what the characteristics of love are, but I've never experienced that until I met my wife. And then she loved me unconditionally, right? So, but the thing about love is these walls, these things that are in you, when they finally get healed, then you can open yourself up, and love has to open itself up, and it has to open itself up to possibly be hurt again. And the only way to move in the fullness of love is to be completely open so you can flow with love and you can fully receive love, but it does leave you vulnerable. But that's why my trust is not in the other person, but my trust is in the one above and also the person he's aligned me with, which is my wife, right? So I do have trust in a person there, but doesn't mean my wife couldn't hurt me. I mean, she's real good. She doesn't. I'm probably more the one that would be the one who would say something out of line. But you kind of catch my drift. I think the thing is that it's unfortunate what people go through, but there is healing. Some people believe that they just stay that way for the rest of your life, and that's the way it is. And I don't believe that way. I feel like I'm living proof to show that there's so many testimonies I could tell of what God's done in my life. But did have to be willing to go down those roads. And some of those were painful, emotional roads, but they were worthwhile, like pruning a tree. When you prune the tree, it grows back more. And, I needed pruned, and I'm grateful for that pruning. So,
The shadow. What does that mean to you, and what do you want it to mean to others?
say that one more time. It cut out on my side. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, so the shadow, what does that mean to you, and what do you want it to mean to others?
Well, it's a revelation. Psalm 23 says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." Anybody's been to a funeral or anything, or maybe you watch on TV, or if they've read it before, it's a psalm it's the number one psalm that is typically used or quoted. And it's usually about physical death. But I felt like what the Lord showed me was something different because it says, "Yea, though I walk through the valley." If it was about physical death, it would terminate in the valley, you'd be done, right? But it's not. And so I felt what he was, when I read that morning, I saw the word shadow. And then I know Psalm 91, that's the second most quoted psalm, is Psalm 91. And that's under the shadow of the Almighty, about the secret place and under the shadow of the Almighty. Well, I like to look up words in the original language, and that's the Old Testament, which is in Hebrew. So I went to both scriptures and I saw it was the same word. So it's interesting because both of those shadows are different sources and they have different effects. So I did ask the Lord what he was trying to show me. And what I felt he was saying was what happens is we're supposed to walk through the valley. So we talked about a lot of things. And these things, what they do, that would be the shadow of death. Will speak into people, get them busy, get their focus off on the wrong thing. That's the shadow of death because it moves away from the truth of God, which is our purpose, our destiny. And I wrote about this in my book. And then we get encapsulated by those things. And we think sometimes those things are freeing, and in all actuality, they're not freeing because they don't allow the fullness of our life to actually be evident. And what it does is we can become comfortable, but we posture ourselves in that valley in a sitting position instead of standing up and walking through the valley, where it becomes a process of which we grow in. And then we become paralyzed in that, or we become rendered useless. So I feel like what God was saying is that for people to rise out of the valley, hopefully the book helps expose shadows that people have maybe thought, mindsets, different things that have kept them trapped in those areas, and help them to move out of those areas and move into the fullness of life.
So these would be shadows, internal shadows, external, or
Correct.
both?
Uh, you know, it would be obviously it's metaphoric in some ways, right? Obviously, I would say it's more internal, right? Because the battlefield is in our mind, right? So if I come out of a childhood, let's just say that where I wasn't appreciated, I was rejected, put down through school, bullied, whatever it may be, if I don't get that healed in my life, right? And that becomes a shadow. And the enemy, because I do believe there's an enemy to my soul as well, will continually feed into that through all sorts of events. Let's say I move into a job and now all of a sudden a boss is curt with me. He doesn't say it the way he should say it. That all fuels what's already there to begin to say, there it is again, right? So that's the way the shadow of death works. It wants to produce death. It could be eternal death, but I'm speaking more in the lines of death in that particular area of your life, your category, your marriage, your job, your finances, your health. It could be a gamut of different things. But I would say it's more interior. It's interesting. Wonder Woman 1984, that was the god of war, I think they called him on. They had the one scene and he said, I didn't, all I did was whisper into their ear. In other words, I didn't do anything. All I did was whisper in their ear. And that's what's happening to all of us, right? We have voices, right? And we're not crazy because we have voices. It's just the way it is. We're talking to ourselves. We also have an enemy. There's thoughts that are coming into our mind. And that's those shadows that are trying to get us into belief systems that are actually not truth. And this is the way it worked all the way back in the beginning in the garden. when the enemy said, "Didn't God say you could eat from every tree in the garden?" And he did say that, but he gave a caveat about not eating of a particular tree, right? And this is how the thoughts work. They can come in and they can appear good, they can appear like truth, but they actually have a piece of lie in them. And once a lie's in it, that's it. It distorts it all, and now it's no longer truth. So to answer your question, I think there can be external things that feed into the internal shadows, right? But I do believe the majority of them is the battlefield on the inside of believing who you really are and not what those shadows tell you that you are.
Perfect. I think I completely understand now. So external factors influencing or impacting internal beliefs that eventually create these shadows, and then you may be impacted by them for the rest of your life or for a period of your life.
Correct. Correct. And I believe wholeheartedly in my life, walking through many of these things, it's not like one particular shadow that once I got through the valley once, I never go through the valley again, right? It would be nice that if it was like that, but in all actuality, maybe it wouldn't be nice, right? Because I think in those valley moments is where I've ended up kind of dying to myself, that piece that's trying to always kind of fight and do its own way and be kind of surrendering in a positive way that led to really a more mature self. I'm much different now. I'm not a rye by any means. I'm still growing, and thank God for that, right? And part of that growth is realizing that you need to grow. And I think sometimes people early on in my life, I probably would have been in pride and just thought I had it all together, even though I didn't. And I sure wouldn't have told anybody I didn't have it all together. So, but yeah, I think this affects everyone. I think my book, even though it's written from a Christian perspective and a Christian relationship with God, I think these shadows are affecting whether you're a believer or whether you're not. It's the way the enemy of our soul works. And that's why these wounds that we get along the way. I mean, I'll give an example. I mean, I was married for over 12 years the first time, and my wife was abusive towards me. And that was very uncommon in 1990 to have a woman who was abused as a man. And I can remember being on spouse abuse hotline while my wife had a butcher knife outside the door, and I had my two kids locked in the bedroom. And the lady on the other end said, just handle it. So at that time, again, people didn't understand that those things actually happen. When I got through and finally that relationship ended, and I ended up becoming a single parent. I mean, as a Marine, my career, again, I said was impeccable. But as a man, there wasn't much left. I mean, I was afraid to go to the grocery store. I was just broken on the inside. I had been belittled so much inside my character. So there's a shadow for sure, right? And that's when I rededicated my life was right about that time. So not only was I coming from all the stuff that I had already had, but then I had this big piece of rejection and over a period of years, right, to fuel all that. And you know, it it was very damaging, right? And so I think this is what happens to people when they get very damaged. I'm just thankful that God put me on the course that He did, and I kept surrendering to that course. Otherwise, I could still be encapsulated in that.
Do you think some men still underestimate the impact that past relationships such as that one has on them?
Yeah, of course. And I don't know if anybody's heard of T.D. Jakes, but he wrote a book and he talked about that. He talks about junk in the trunk, and that when you get married, you end up getting each other's key to the trunk, and then you open up the trunk, and then the junk is in there because you're going to have to deal with it as well. That's what he's saying. I do think that, but I do think that that can be, in some ways, prevented. It doesn't mean we don't have memories of these things, right? Like, but I do think that we can come to the point again through, I believe, a lot of healing and God healing my heart, that I didn't have to and no longer operate out of those feelings. In other words, I could know that they happened, but they no longer drive who I am as a person, right? But yes, to answer your question, of course. And then again, those build up walls. I mean, why do people that are in abusive relationships typically end up in another abusive relationship and then in another abusive relationship, right? It's because they grow comfortable in that. Look, I was some people could look at, well, if I told my complete story, be like, why in the world did you stay? But I mean, this is it, right? It's like it's the definition of insanity, right? I mean, you just keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Um, but yes, to answer your question, I think it's not even just relationships, it's just anything, right? And in all those things affected in relationships for sure. Because again, with my wife, where she did a fantastic job, there's a scripture that says it's the goodness of God that leads to repentance. That's what leads to change. It's the goodness of who he is. That even in the midst of my frailty, my humanness, his goodness comes in and reveals that. And I'm like, how can you still be good to me when I'm like that? And that in itself shifts me on the inside to move his direction. It's just the way that it is. And so my wife was like that when I was defensive, like because I thought that she was coming with motive, and because people always had motive, my wife prior had motive. She wanted to hurt me in some way, say something that would hurt me. So it's hard to believe that now I'm with another person, even though I trusted my wife and I loved her, felt that she was from God. My life is a lot different, but deep down in there was still a piece that needed to be healed, that still believed that she could end up hurting me. And so I'm putting up walls. So I get defensive. But she loved me through that by her goodness. She didn't yell at me. She didn't call out my stuff. I don't know how she did it, but she did it because it's hard to hug a porcupine, that's for sure. And I was a porcupine a few times. So, but through all that, that eventually began to drop my defenses. And then I began to own up to my defenses. And then by bringing that out, I began to get healed of what was driving my defenses and realized that she was not there to hurt me, but she was there to love me. So yeah, it can have an effect for sure.
Mike, let me ask you one final question, but I want to give you three wishes for this question, right? What are
Okay.
three things you wish people knew about having the, let me rephrase that. What are three things you wish people knew about having a strong support system, such as your spouse, your faith, and otherwise in their life when dealing with trauma?
Wow, three wishes. I think the first one is just to know that it's possible to be out of where you're at. That's the first thing. In other words, there's hope. So I that would be one wish that people would understand there is hope. Because in the midst of trauma, typically many times you feel isolated, you're backed into a corner, you feel like you're unique, you're the only one experiencing this, and that diminishes your hope every step of the way. So that's the first thing I would say is I would wish that they would realize that there is hope, that there is a way out. I also would wish that they would not base what the now is or what the future is on what they have in their rearview mirror, right? Because the rearview mirror can produce a lot of things, and I don't believe by any means that those were God intended things. Those were human things that came against us and that harmed us along the way. So I would hope that people would realize that today can be different and tomorrow and the rest of their life can be different by choices. I do believe we are a part of that equation. I do wholeheartedly. I think, thirdly, I do wish that well, you mentioned it, but I do wish that people would understand going back kind of to the first one, but that relationship will be key. And that could be a relationship with a good counselor in all actuality. It may not be another person like a person of the opposite sex, which, in more likely and probably better wise at the beginning, is not to get married up or get to be if you're single, stay single until you get some healing in your heart. I guess what I'm saying, because what happens is too many times we end up where we're hurting so bad ourselves, we find someone else is hurting, and then it becomes a much more complicated relationship based off of that. So I would say there's hope in all three categories in all three ways. So I don't know if that answered the question completely, but that's a hard with the wishes. I don't know, I got the wish